It's time now for the big question, in which we tackle a major news story of the day. Tonight, with multiple candidates, some high profile, some less well known, seeking the leadership of the Conservative Party and the coveted job of Prime Minister. Just who should take over from Boris Johnson? That's tonight's big question. Let's debate this with former Conservative Minister and Tory MP Anne Widdecombe, entrepreneur and star of Dragon's Den, Duncan Bannatyne, and best-selling author and journalist Laura Dodsworth. Laura, let's start with you. Who do you think should be our next Prime Minister?
I have to disagree with you on Rishi Sunak. Definitely not Rishi Sunak. I think if you've been paying attention for the last few years, if you've been watching his branding and his videos that he's been releasing throughout the pandemic management, he's been behaving like a Prime Minister in waiting. Now, his Ready for Rishi campaign, which just launched, the domain of which was registered in December 21, which is interesting, was, I think, truly awful. I mean, this video demonstrates very slick values, soaring, emotional piano music, but it was very low on substance. In fact, the first minute was an origin story going back through 2 generations of his family. Now, I think that actually there was a 1-minute origin story because his whole campaign has been very low on substance. The most that he did in this video was refer to the fact that we shouldn't be comforted by fairy tales. What he means is that we're not going to get any tax cuts. Well, right now, the country has the highest tax burden of 70 years. This whole video treated voters like children, which is something I really want to draw people's attention to. I think he's totally out of touch. I agree with your panelists on the fact that he can't really relate to the nation because he's so privileged, as is his wife.
Laura, they're all privileged. All politicians are privileged.
He's been all about big spending, big tax. He's basically a big socialist. He's not a small c conservative. Unlike Kemi Badenoch, who I think is a really interesting contender.
Well, Kemi Badenoch is certainly very impressive as well, but you've complained that he organised his leadership campaign months in advance. Don't we want a Prime Minister that's on it, you know, that's so prepared, so organised, so disciplined?
That's one way of putting it. Now, if he was to come out and say, I've been planning my leadership strategy for months.
They all are, Laura. They're all planning their leadership. They all want to be Prime Minister.
It's disingenuous. And I think what we know we're going to get with Rishi Sunak is bitter medicine. We're going to get austerity at a time when we've got the highest tax burden we've had for 70 years. Actually, we need to scrap green levies, reverse the national insurance rise. What he wants to do is to take with one hand with taxes and then dole out little handouts to the poor with the other hand. And actually, I would say, in the spirit of Kemi Badenoch, what we need to do is to reduce the size of the state and stop all the micromanagement.
Well, look, I'm going to come to you in just a moment, Duncan Bannatyne. As a leading entrepreneur, I'm very keen to hear what you think about the economy. But Anne Widdecombe, we have some breaking news, which is that Michael Gove has just endorsed Kemi Badenoch as his preferred option for leader of the Conservative Party and Prime Minister. First of all, Anne, your reaction to Gove's endorsement of Badenoch?
If I were Badenoch, I'd be very worried indeed. Let's all remember the time that we endorsed Boris Johnson, ran his campaign and stabbed him in the back right at the last moment when Boris could do nothing about it. I think, frankly, Gove's backing would make me very, very nervous indeed. And if I were Kemi, I'd be looking behind me the whole time. I don't go along with your hagiography on Rishi Sunak. He doesn't have imagination. You know, he's not going to cut taxes. You say that's a responsible attitude. In fact, it's a very cowardly attitude. We all know from the Thatcher years that the way you stimulate the economy and get growth is by giving people more of their own money and letting them make decisions as to what to do with it. I also think, however unfair it may be, and I'll concede it's unfair, but knowing the press and the media, as we all do, with all the issues that there have been over his green card and his wife's tax arrangements, your profession isn't going to let that go, Mark. You know, it's going to be endlessly looking for the next thing. And I don't think we need those sorts of distractions. So with some regret, because Rishi's a good Brexiteer, and that, to my mind, you know, is one of the biggest things I'm looking for. But with some regret.
Anne Widdecombe, you served under Margaret Thatcher. Rishi Sunak is Margaret Thatcher in a suit. This is a guy who's running a campaign based upon a tough message, which is that the country's broke and can't afford tax cuts. Now, we can debate tax cuts, but this is a guy who's taking an unpopular position whilst seeking election as leader of the Conservative Party. That's not cowardice, that's balls.
No. And Mrs. Thatcher said the country's broke, which it certainly was. If you can think back to 79, I can actually remember it. Mrs. Thatcher said the country's broke and we're going to sort that by making tax cuts, and she did. So I just don't think Rishi's got the necessary degree of courage. But having said that, let's see how this election pans out. We don't yet even know the full slate.
Duncan, as far as I'm concerned, the only show in town is the economy. You're one of the country's leading entrepreneurs. You are a wealth creator, a big employer, and your businesses contribute a huge amount to the exchequer. Who would you like to see in charge?
Well, first of all, we have a huge problem with the economy in this country. And it's got to be somebody very strong and very, very willing to make the right decisions. And one of the decisions that we have to do is we have to decide how we're going to get the tax in. We can't use the old traditional methods we used to use of business tax on shops, which are now closed and lying derelict. But we have a situation where about a huge percentage of people walk amongst us and pay no tax because they're what is called non-doms. Rishi is one. Saidi Javed is one. Rishi's wife is one. They have the ability to just say, I'm claiming non-dom status the next 10 years and pay no tax. How can we have a Prime Minister, if we believe, and I believe, we should repeal the Non-Dom Act, we should scrap it, they should all pay tax, and that's how we should get the tax in. How can we do that if we've got a Prime Minister who's non-dom? We can't, it's impossible. I think we should have a Prime Minister who's not non-dom in this country.
However, Duncan Bannatyne, we don't want to scare millionaires and billionaires away from our country, do we? We want them to stay here and spend their cash, which of course they do, including the non-doms.
The biggest majority of non-doms came to this company penniless. And they made some money in this country. They're not coming, bringing millions of pounds in from abroad. Very, very few do that. I worked with someone who's a non-dom, and he told me he was very, 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 very keen to tell me he was a non-dom. He'd sorted his affairs out, so he would never pay tax. And he came to this country penniless, and his children would never pay tax because the law allows to pass your non-dom status to pass to your children. So if your father was a non-dom, you can be non-dom and you claim non-dom status and pay no tax. It's not about how much money they brought in, and there's not many of them. And you can have another tax, another allowance anyway, where you allow people who come in and created so many jobs and brought in so much wealth to have a tax benefit. But it's not, the way it is every single non-dom can do it. And there's probably half the people who've applied to be Prime Minister so far are non-doms. I mean, I think, I'm torn between Tom Tugendhat and Grant Sharp, because I do want it. I'm really, really unhappy that Ben Wallace didn't apply, because I think he would have been a great Prime Minister. We need someone with a lot of discipline and sort of this stupid drinking culture they have in the House of Commons, for example. So I'm torn between Tom Tugendhat and Grant Sharp as Prime Minister.
And what policies would you like to see them announce in relation to the economy? How can they help you and your businesses, your staff and your customers, Duncan?
Well, I think they can help businesses and help the cost of living crisis by reducing VAT from 20% to 17.5%. I think that'd be a big help. And we've closed 4 clubs since before the pandemic out of 80. So that's the percentage of it's 200 jobs we lost, 200 people who are not employed anymore. And that would be a good help in not closing more clubs. A lot of clubs closed. So that's one of the best policies, and also scrapping the non-dom law.
Yeah,
And
you've mentioned Tugendhat. You mentioned discipline, of course. Somebody that served in the military, a brave man, a man of integrity. What about Grant Shapps? Why has he caught your eye? I mean, obviously he's handled the battle with the RMT rail union with some grace, hasn't he?
Yeah, and I've listened to him talking over the last few days since he threw his hat in the ring, and I've just been very impressed with what he's saying. He's answering questions straight and very sensibly. I found Tom Tugendhat a little bit weak on that, because he answers the question by saying, well, I fought for my country, so I'll fight for this. That's not really what he should be saying. He should be telling us what he's going to fight for, how he's going to fight.
Anne, you're not having Shapps and you're not having Tugendhat.
Certainly not Tugendhat. He was a rabid Remainer. I don't just mean somebody who voted Remain and then said, OK, so be it. But I mean a really, really rabid Remainer. And I think that that is the last thing we need. We don't need to reopen that old sore. We need to go ahead now on the basis that not only we've got Brexit, but we're glad of it. So I set enormous store by that. Tugendhat hasn't got the experience, to heavens above. You know, we're up against people who've got years of ministerial experience, and he just doesn't have any, and it's too early. And the mere fact that he thinks that he is ready to run, I think throws enormous question marks over his judgment, quite honestly.
Grant Shapps is a canny operator, isn't he, Anne? Grant Shapps got in hot water about a year before Theresa May fell, saying she should go. At the time, he was pilloried, but he was on the right side of history.
Oh, well, you'll probably say that about all those who said that Boris should go. You know, once people start saying that the leader should go, generally means that they've been thinking it for quite a while and that they've been preparing, as has Rishi with his slick video.
But Shapps was right. Shapps was right.
Why wasn't he getting on running the Exchequer instead of making slick videos?
Well, he was very busy, Anne. He rolled out the furlough scheme, although I think lockdowns were a mistake. If you're going to keep people in their homes, furlough was a very successful policy, brilliantly executed in a matter of weeks.
Well, you would think that furlough was the sole invention of Rishi Sunak, and it wasn't. I mean, furlough was what the cabinet decided to do when they knew they were going to have to tell people they couldn't go to work. Come on, wake up, Mark. Where have you been?
Anne, I'm going to... Let me tell you, I'm always awake when you're on the show, Anne, and I'm keen to hear more. In fact, your nomination, if you're willing to share that at this stage. But first, let's go back to Laura Dodsworth. Laura, you're not having Rishi Sunak. Is there anybody you consider to be a satisfactory candidate?
Something I found disappointing, actually, in among all the contenders, is you can't put a piece of paper between a lot of them. I actually think what we need so badly is a sense of vision for the future. We need a long-term vision. I think the country is a mess at the moment, and I don't think people realise how bad the winter's going to be. Right now, in the midst of summer, it's easy to forget that probably tens of thousands of people are going to be in fuel poverty this winter. That's elderly people who'll be sheltering under blankets and die of cold. This is no exaggeration. It happens every winter, and this winter will be a lot worse. At the moment, the amount of people are paying at fuel pumps, national insurance, VAT, all the tax increases disproportionately hit the poor and the middle class. So we're in a mess, but we have to look beyond. I think that out of all of the contenders, the only one who I feel has a sense of vision was, surprisingly for me, Kemi Badenoch. She ran a very good op-ed in the Times. I think it was intelligent, but also she's had quite a lot of courage to confront issues head on. Now, you referred to Rishi Sunak having balls before. I have to disagree. I think he comes across like a petulant child when he's answering difficult questions from the press, which he's going to have to get used to if he wants to be PM. But also, he's one of these politicians who hasn't been able to say what a woman is. He doesn't want to get caught up in the culture wars and identity politics. I think Kemi Badenoch's quite exciting. I think she's a bit of a gamble, but, you know, Boris Johnson was a gamble. I think she's a gamble who would pay off better. So she would be my contender. However, I have to say that I'm not a member of the party, and so I don't get to vote.
No, although she did vote for vaccine mandates for healthcare workers, didn't she?
She did.
In the Commons.
But they all did. They all voted for vaccine passports, apart from Tom Tugendhat. Look, none of these contenders have got unblemished voting records. I think they've all been really weak on vaccine passports, and frankly, this country only just swerved a totally dystopic, totalitarian nightmare. I would love her to say more about that. You know, even if she was to be honest and say, look, I didn't vote against, I didn't abstain because I'm in government, I'd like her to say something to assure us that that hideous monstrosity isn't going to rear its head again. But I think she has a vision for the future, and that's what I think is exciting.
Anne Widdecombe, could Kemi Badenoch be the surprise candidate in the way that Margaret Thatcher was in 1975?
Well, it's possible. I'm not prepared yet to pin my colours to any particular mast. I was looking at Nadhim Zahawi because likewise voted leave in 2016, so he's got a solid Brexit record. It isn't just a matter of convenience. And of course, an immigrant who didn't speak a word of English until he was 11 and has made a huge success of his life, which I think is inspiring and the sort of story that we want people with difficult backgrounds to hear and to be inspired by. So I was looking at Nadim Sadawi, and I gather there are questions. I don't know how well-founded they are, but there are questions now, according to one newspaper at any rate, over his tax fares. I mean, you just can't get away from it. As soon as you get somebody that you think is good, there's some question mark is raised. Whether we will get through this and have any candidate without a question mark against his or her name, I don't know, but I wouldn't bet on it at this stage.
In that case, parachute Anne Widdecombe into a safe seat. Anne for PM. And I promise you, Anne, I will eat my words. I will destroy every copy of my Big Opinion monologue, and I will say Anne Widdecombe for PM, the best Prime Minister we never had. And I don't say that in jest, by the way. A deeply principled and talented individual you are, Anne. What a treat to have you on the show. Final thoughts from Duncan Bannatyne. How important are the next couple of years in terms of government policy, in terms of the new Prime Minister in the world of business?
They're phenomenally important. We have a situation where we can't even pay the interest on the money we've borrowed because of Rishi's ridiculous furlough scheme, where he allowed people to actually go on furlough and have another job, and the money that you loaned to companies which never came back. We're in billions and billions of pounds worth of debt that was unnecessary. So it's very important we start paying down our debt, but also not increasing taxes for the working man. And so we need somebody to come in very quickly and spend the next 2 years really sorting the country out.
A privilege to have you on the show, Duncan, and do join us again soon. And also a delight to have Anne Widdecombe and Laura Dodsworth, best-selling author and journalist. What a fascinating conversation. What do you think? Who is your choice for Britain's next Prime Minister? Mark at gbnews.uk.